Hello YouTube and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about the other American warships that are available in World of Warships. So we're going to start with the destroyers. So the first, I have these names, I'm not really sure how to say other than the Fletcher. So we're just going to call them the Tier 1, So the first destroyer you get is after you unlock the St. Louis cruiser. This is it. It's just your typical, I want to say pre-World War One. No, World War One destroyer. So it was so the Tier 1 cruiser called the Wikis, I think that's how I say it. It was one of the massively produced destroyers the US Navy ever did. She entered service in 1918 and the ships of her series were at 111. So there were a lot of ships built of this class. She didn't really have that powerful guns, but she did have an increased smoke screen. So she could provide cover for other ships. You can also see the loadouts. She didn't really have that much armor. So it looks like she didn't have any armor really. The second ship, the Tier 3, is the Clemson. She's a little different. The bridge is different. Her stern is a little different. She was developed in the Wikis class. The Clemson belonged to the second series of US Navy flush deckers. The ship's hull was designed to be in such a way that the single mounts of main batteries could be replaced with twin mounts. So instead of the Wikis class, this one has a much better different deck setup, so she can hold double the destroyer's firepower pretty much. She entered service in 1919 and there were 156 ships in her. No, sorry, I can't speak. 156 ships in her class. The Tier 4 ship. I'm gonna try and say that. So this is where we get into the more modern design with fully encased guns. That are mounted kind of similar to the way a battleship or cruiser are, with one below, one higher up, with the bridge. Same thing with the back, and more torpedo tubes. This ship entered series just before World War II in 1934, but there were only eight ships in her series. She was a second generation, or she was a new generation of ships, and she also had an AA defense. And her torpedo tubes were placed in the middle of the ship instead of on the sides of it. The Tier 5 ship, the Mahan, I think say its name, she's a little different. Her guns are pretty much the same, but her torpedo tubes, instead of having both of them in the center, there's one in the center and two on the sides. She had a low torpedo range. She was developed from her previous class, Farragut. I'm not even gonna try and say it. She carried a more powerful torpedo armament, and she was armed up. And at the beginning of World War II, these ships were armed. These destroyers were armed with several automatic AA guns to fight the enemy aircraft much more effectively. This ship entered service in 1936, and there were 18 ships in her series. So that's 3, 4, 5. The Tier 6 is the Benson. So the Benson, this is where we're starting to see an encased gun position on the back. Still no in the middle though. This ship ended series just before America entered World War II in 1940. There were 30 ships. She was a large ship for her type compared to the previous destroyers. She was much better armed, more efficient artillery mounts, and had a lot better torpedo tubes. She had a increased smoke screen. She had a sluggish shot, so it was difficult to aim at long ranges. And yeah. And then finally we have the Fletcher. So the Fletcher is one of the more modern destroyers. All her gun positions are completely encased. Look, she has radar. This ship ended series a year after America entered World War II in 1942. There were 175 ships in the series. Fletcher belonged to the most numerous series of destroyers in the world. She proved to be a very successful ship, combining high speed and efficient AA defenses as well as a powerful artillery and torpedo armament. So this ended up being one of the most mass-produced ships in the world in World War II. Now if you go to the Bureau, there's a couple of other ships for American destroyers. There's the Gearing. The Gearing was a further development of the Fletcher class destroyers and the largest ship of her type in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Okay. So this ship can only be gained by doing the Bureau. And the Gearing class had been in service for more than 50 years, up until the 1970s. There's more destroyers over here in the store. You have the Hill, the USS Hill. So this ship ended series in 1918. She did enter series. She was designed in 1918, but never went into full production. One of the draft designs for a destroyer, flotilla leader, production of which started at the end of World War I, was armed with 5 main battery guns. So they started production but never finished it. So next up you have the Charleston Hughes. So this ship entered service again before America entered World War II in 1940. There were 30 ships in her class. She was a rather large ship for her type. Compared to her predecessors, the ship was much better armed, owing to more efficient artillery mounts and successful armament of novel quadruple torpedo tubes. Then you have the, I think it's called a Benham. Could be wrong there. This ship entered service in 1939, and there were 10 ships of her class. The lead ship of a series of destroyers, which main armament composed of 4 quadruple torpedo tubes placed along both sides of the ship, in addition to dual-purpose 127mm guns. So she had more torpedo tubes. That's just another Benham. You have the USS Sims. This ship entered service in 1939, and there are 12 ships in the series. A well-armed, high-speed destroyer with excellent maneuverability, high rate of fire, and excellent aiming speeds for her dual-purpose artillery mounts to ensure good firepower and efficient AA defenses of her time. You have the... What's all these names that I can't seem to say? There's this one. I'm not even gonna try and say it. Yeah, I'm not gonna try and say the one. So this ship, she entered service in 1935. Okay, so she was a sister ship to the Farragut class. She was a Farragut class destroyer, so this is another one of the ships. This ship relied on dual-purpose guns as a primary armament. In 1942, one of the 127mm guns was replaced with automatic anti-aircraft guns. And as before, there were only 8 ships in a series. And then you have the USS Kidd. So this ship's a Fletcher class destroyer that has a powerful 8 anti-aircraft armament and a high-speed. Overall course from 1944 and 1945, she was modernized to receive enhanced AA armament due to demounting one of the 2 torpedo launchers. She entered service in 1943, 2 years before the war ended. So that's it for all the American destroyers. Now I'm going to go and move on to the cruisers. So the first cruiser you're going to get, actually really the first ship in the game you're going to get, is the Uss Albany. She was part of I know she was part of the Great White Fleet, hence why she's white, really, and brown. This ship was actually built in the United Kingdom for the Brazilian Navy, but was purchased by the U.S. government before 1900 or 1900. Albany, even though she was one of the small ships, probably about the size of the destroyer, it looks like. She was the most successful cruiser in the U.S. Navy, and she had a powerful armament. She entered service in 1900, and there were 2 ships in the series. The second ship you get is the USS St. Louis. Again, she was part of the Great White Fleet. Somebody's down the dirt bike. A typical big cruiser of the pre-dreadnought era, the ship was armed with numerous artillery, whose rate of fire was quite rapid for her time, and an armor belt protecting the propulsion, but featured only moderate speed. There are 3 ships in the series, and she entered service in 1906. And you go to the Terra 3 ship, the Uss Phoenix. This is where you get into the more gray look. A scout cruiser designed whose distinct features were very high speeds and torpedo armament. In contrast to most cruisers over time, the cruiser's artillery was placed in open mounts. Phoenix never materialized, but served as a prototype for the development of the Omaha cruisers. So she never really entered service, but her year of design was 1916, during World War II, World War I. And then there's the Omaha class. The Omaha class, in this game, I'm actually very successful with it, even though I sold it. A high-speed scout cruiser carrying torpedo armament and relatively powerful artillery, with part of the guns placed in turrets. She was the first cruiser in the U.S. Navy to receive an aircraft handling equipment. So there's the aircraft equipment right there. There were 10 ships in the Omaha series, and she entered service in 1923. And then you have these 2 ships. You have the Uss Pensacola, which is one of my favorite cruisers of all time. The first U.S. Navy cruiser built under the limitations of the Washington Naval Treaty with powerful artillery but weak armor, which characterized of such ships. The cruiser was armed with 203mm main guns, on the bias of which she was registered as a heavy cruiser soon after commissioning. However, the ship's armor actually corresponded to that of a light cruiser. There were 2 ships in the series, and she entered service in 1930. And you have the USS Dallas. A design version for I can't speak. A design version of a smaller light cruiser developed, which preceded the creation of the Helena class cruisers. She featured characteristics of most subsequent ships of this type in the U.S. Navy. Moderate speed, the absence of torpedo armament, so these cruisers did not have torpedoes, and the availability of dual-purpose guns complementing the 152mm main battery-mounted turrets. She never went into action though, and she wasn't actually built, but she was designed by the Navy in 1934. And you have the USS New Orleans. The first heavy cruiser of the new generation. The key difference from the preceding cruisers was remarkable reinforced armor. Taking into account her limited displacement, the ship boasted a successful balance of armament, protection, and speed. She entered service in 1934, and the ships in the series were 7. And then you have the USS Helena. A light cruiser close to the Brooklyn class ships, but with a different architecture and a full-fledged dual-purpose artillery. One of the few ships of her type in the world that carried 15 152mm guns as her main battery. She entered service in 1939, and her ships in series was 2. And then you have the Baltimore. Designed after the treaty limitations had been lifted and built using the experience gained in World War II. Greater dimensions of the cruiser improved its survivability owing to a reinforced deck and enhanced protection for the propulsion. In addition to the main battery guns, the ship received dual-purpose artillery mounts, which are the 5-inch guns you see surrounding the bridge and in the back. She entered service in 1943, and there were 16 ships in her series. And you have my personal ship, named after my hometown, the USS Cleveland. A Cleveland-class cruiser, this ship had excellent AA capabilities and good armor protection for this type of ship, with all performance characteristics combined. She was one of the most powerful light cruisers of the World War II period. There were 28 ships in her series, and she entered service in 1942. And then when you go over here to the Bureau, you have the Dismanis, I think say it. So, she was the most advanced heavy cruiser in the Navy, and she was one of the last cruisers produced in the Navy. So, the last ship of her series was the USS Newport News, which was launched in March 1948 at the shipyard of the same name in Virginia. All 3 ships, the Dismanis, the Solomon, and Newport News, were the last heavy cruisers in the world to enter service. They can rightfully be called the most advanced ships of their type, primarily due to phenomenal firepower. Wait, there should be more. Okay. Then you have the super heavy cruiser, the USS Alaska. USS Alaska, designation CB-1, was the lead ship of the Alaska class of large cruisers which served the United States Navy during the later stages of World War II. Cruiser Alaska was commissioned on June 17, 1944, despite the war being at its peak. The new ship wasn't rushed into battle as her crew had to test the cruiser and check all of her systems. By By the end of the year, the cruiser had been in 2 exercise cruises to the West Indies and the Caribbean. After that, she took part in ship to shore bombardment training, as well as preparations for dealing with airstrikes. It was not until January 8th, 1945, the Alaska began her career setting course for Pearl Harbor. And you have the war cruster, something like that. So she was the last generation of American classic cruisers. Commissioned between 1948 and 49, the Warcruster class cruisers during their years of service were painted with the same standard Measure 13 camouflage paint pattern as the other ships of the post-war U.S. Navy. Has gray with black tops for the funnels and mainmast, but alternatives always rightly exceeded our imaginations. For example, what would the ship look like during World War II in the MS-3/18D camouflage, which was originally designed for destroyers, but was then adapted for heavy cruisers like Baltimore. Fortunately, the Worcester crest, or whatever it is, didn't differ from them much in size. Oh wait, I got my archive. It's just a bit of shit that way. Then when you go to the store, you will find the Uss Flint, which looks more like a heavy cruiser to me. This ship belonged to a series of cruisers with very powerful dual-purpose guns. The major difference from the lead ship was her short-range AA armament, which improved at the expense of fewer main guns. There were 11 ships in the series, and she entered service in 1944. Then you have the Indianapolis. One of the last cruisers in the U.S. Navy that was subject to the Washington Naval Treaty. Compared to her predecessors, the ship featured heavier armor, which remarkably improved its survivability. By the end of World War II, the cruiser's armor was reinforced with numerous automatic AA guns. She entered service in 1932, and there were 2 ships in the series. But the Indianapolis isn't just famous because she was a cruiser. She was also famous because she is the ship that carried the atomic bombs to the island of Tinia, I think it was, that were later dropped on Japan. It was a top secret mission for President Truman himself. She had no destroyer escort, and she was actually sunk after a Japanese submarine fired, I think it was 6 torpedoes, some of which hit her this side of the ship, and she ended up sinking, and everybody thought that the SOS calls were fake, and the sailors were actually trapped for I think it was about a week in the open ocean, and there were only 317 survivors of like a 2,000 strong crew. And actually, Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III was actually court-martialed because of the loss of his ship. And Bill Clinton cleared his name in the 1990s. And you have the Uss Helena. A relatively small ship of her type featuring powerful AA armament and designed for the use in joint operations with destroyers, the ships carried torpedo tubes and numerous dual-purpose rapid-fire artillery. There were 11 ships in the series, and she entered service in 1941. And then we have the Bosie. A Brooklyn-class light cruiser. Her main battery consisted of 15 rapid-fire 152mm guns. In the 1940s, the cruiser carried numerous automatic AA guns. She entered service in 1938, and there were 7 ships in the series. And then finally, you have, I already did the battleships last night. You have the aircraft carriers. So the first ship you get is CV-1, the USS Langley. Well, it doesn't have that much torpedo protection. She had slow aircraft, but she also had tough aircraft. She was the first U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. Langley was converted from a coaler. She had low speed and was used as an experimental ship for testing various technical innovations as well as for training for naval pilots. The carrier was equipped with secondary armament to repel attacks from enemy destroyers. She entered service in 1922, and there was one ship in her series. And actually, I think she also saw, if I recall, her fate was that she was sunk during World War II in the Pacific, I believe, because she was used as I think it was a transport ship or aircraft. I could be wrong about that though. So then you go to the Terra 4 ship, which is the USS Ranger. So now you're getting into the encased air hangars and the side bridge with some better armor. She had tough aircraft, powerful AA defenses, but slow aircraft. The first U.S. Navy carrier of special construction, so this ship was built this way, she wasn't converted. The ship carried a large air group. The carrier speed was quite high for her type. Her drawbacks included lack of torpedo protection, so this carrier did not have any had no torpedo protection. It was a practical arrangement of aircraft elevators which slowed down the handling of air groups, so our aircraft carriers were badly placed. She entered service in 1934, and there was one ship in her series. And then you have one of the most famous ships of World War II, the USS Lexington. Now you get to the wider ships with the smokestack right there, and the fully encased ships. She carries Dauntless and Avenger, Dauntless dive bombers and Avenger torpedo bombers. She had above average secondary battery range, powerful AA defense, top aircraft. When commissioned, the Lexington was one of the largest carriers in existence. She was converted from an unfinished battle cruiser. She had good armor and advanced torpedo protection. Owing to her dimensions, the aircraft carrier was equipped with a very spacious hangar and was armed with numerous AA and dual-purpose artillery. The ship's powerful propulsion created very high speeds. She entered service in 1927, and there was 2 ships in her series. Now, I do know the fate of this ship. During the Battle of the Coral Sea in World War II, this ship, who was also named the Lady Lex, was actually sunk because she was damaged, and so the American Navy scuttled her to keep her out of the hands of the Japanese. And then finally you go to the Bureau, and here it is. You get CBL-48 that was laid down on July 10th, 1944 in New Jersey. This ship was named after Saipan. She's named Saipan after a strategically important island in the northern Mariana Islands that the U.S. Navy had taken from the Japanese just the day before. Let's see. So, yeah. Like here we go. Unlike the Independence class, these 2 ships were built as aircraft carriers from the outset. Although their The project was based on hauling engines of the Baltimore class cruisers. As a result, these ships turned out to be much more effective compared to their predecessors. Saipan boasted better sea-keeping characteristics and hull structure. Her arm belt could be compared with that of the Essex class aircraft carriers, and she had conventional cruiser-type anti-torpedo protection and more reliable protection against aviation ammunition. Her flight deck was reinforced for the purpose of accommodating new aircraft. The air group included over 40 planes, and the ship could reach speeds of up to 33 knots. So that's it for the U.S. destroyers and cruisers. Tomorrow I will be talking about the Japanese fleet. No, actually tomorrow I'll be talking about the United Kingdom fleet, then the Japanese, then the German, French, USSR, Italy, Polynesian, and the premium ships. But that's it for this video. Hit that like and subscribe button below. Don't forget to leave a comment, and I will see you all next time.